Welcome back to Outside the Cockpit, presented by the Intermission Sports. We are back. F1 is back. No more breaks. We got a triple header coming up. As always, we are here with the Outside the Cockpit crew. Today, I am your host. I'm not really your host, Alex Baumgartner, aka Papa Intermission. I am joined by Sam Dontig, TJ Corrado, and Julian Quintero, aka the Outside the Cockpit crew. We're going to be talking a little bit about the race on Sunday, which is Spa-Francorchamps in Belgium. Then we got Zandorf, and then we got Monza, I believe. But today's episode, we are focusing on Spa. We're going to talk a little bit about Netflix Season 4 of Drive to Survive and the Shoot Me documentary. So, how are we feeling? F1 is back, and yeah, we got a lot of races coming up.
Yeah, really excited. It's been a long break, long summer break, but now that we're all refreshed, I'm just ready to go. I'm ready to wake up early and watch racing, and it's finally gonna be useful doing something on Sunday mornings.
Yes, indeed. There's a purpose now to wake up early enough to watch some races. I'm super excited. F1 is back, and we've got a great lineup of races coming up. Obviously, Spa, then Zandvoort, which we didn't get to see last year because of COVID and stuff, and Mons as well, which all produce great races. So I'm super excited.
Yeah, me too. I can't wait for F1. Sundays for me have just been a bunch of IndyCar races, which I love IndyCar too, but F1 is where it's at, really. So really excited.
Now let's just get right into it. Let's get right into this.
And with that being said, we are getting right into it. Looking at the driver standings right now, Sir Lewis Hamilton is, in fact, leading the Drivers' Championship. Once again, he has 195 points, had 4 wins this season, and 8 podiums after the break, followed right behind Red Bull's Max Verstappen, who has 187 points, meaning the top 2 spots are separated by just 8 points, and Lando Norris from McLaren. Despite not having a single win all season and 3 podiums, he is 3rd in the Drivers' Championship, followed by Valtteri Bottas, Sergio Perez, Carlos Sainz, Leclerc, and so on. So, Red Bull, they've been kind of getting the short end of the stick in the last couple of races, whereas Mercedes, even though Bottas had that huge crash, which knocked out a bunch of people, their main driver is now leading the Drivers' Championship once again. What is going to happen in these next 3 races? Obviously, we are going to the Netherlands, which is Verstappen's home, after this race at Spa, and then we have Monza. So, what's going on right now? Look how tight the championship is. These two competing, it's going to be like this the entire season, I think. What do you guys think?
Yeah, I mean that's always how these things tend to go, especially when you look back to when Hamilton was fighting with Nico Rosberg. I mean, it was always going down to the wire last Abu Dhabi. You know, it was always like really, really close up until very late in the season. And we didn't get that. We haven't gotten that since then because Ferrari's challenge would just fade away in 2019. It didn't really mount much of one in 2020. Obviously, COVID affected everyone and everything. But this year we finally have a title championship that I think will go down to the final race of the year. This could be something that everyone's been wanting for a while now.
Yeah, that's definitely one thing that we focused on as F1 fans. I really do feel like it's gonna go down to the wire. It just appeared that way with how these drivers have been, and especially with how Verstappen's finally come back up. It's definitely shown out that it's going to turn out that way. Now, as mentioned, the next 3 tracks are Spa, followed by Zandvoort, and then Monza. And on paper, these are tracks that technically are favoring Mercedes. So that's just going to be very, very interesting how it ends up playing out in the future. But we'll just have to see how Red Bull adjusts. We've seen that in the tracks that are on paper. Red Bull tracks, Mercedes has done very well, or vice versa. We saw this past practice session, Red Bull dominated the second sector at Spa, which is very downforce based, but down the straights, those Mercedes were a lot faster. So on these tracks that are going to be a lot more on the speed down the straights rather than on the downforce, you best believe that Mercedes are going to try to pack in as many points as they can on these weekends to try to get a little like cushion on the Red Bulls behind them.
Yeah, I mean, when you look at what's at stake here for Lewis Hamilton, he wins a championship this year. He's the F1 driver with the most championships in history, right? So, that's something really he's pushing for. And then on the other end of it, it's Max Verstappen, who this season has been his best chance at getting that title to be the youngest F1 driver to ever win a championship. So it really is a very interesting battle of, I don't want to say old versus new because Hamilton isn't that old yet, and then
Well,
Verstappen isn't
it's
too.
it's kind of fair to say that Hamilton's 36 now. He's been in F1 forever, so
Yeah, I guess so.
I would say it's fair to say that.
It's really going to be interesting the back half of this season. Really excited to see how it shakes out.
Yeah, I'm super excited as well to see how it shapes up. And I think as well, when you look forward towards the rest of the season, it's going to be really interesting to see how Red Bull can rebound after kind of their mishaps the past few races and how well Max Verstappen can bounce back and kind of fight back against Lewis Hamilton. Because right now, Mercedes and Lewis Hamilton kind of have the momentum right now after some great successes at Silverstone and Hungary as well. But I think looking forward, Red Bull do have the chance to kind of sweep back and take the lead. It's going to be a great second half of the season for sure.
Well, there was the practice sessions today, and I believe Valtteri Bottas finished first in the first practice session, and then Max Verstappen did, I believe, finish first in the second practice session, but that is after it went red flag because his Red Bull went into, I believe it was a wall. Yeah, so if that foretells anything that we've seen in the last couple of races for both teams, oh no. Because obviously we've seen a couple, obviously it's just practice, but let's hope there's not more of what we've seen in the last couple of races where a Mercedes hits a Red Bull or a Red Bull gets a DNF. Like, shout out to Max Verstappen. I believe it was the last race where he was basically driving a car without a floor and still managed to finish that race. He's just been extremely unlucky. Obviously, we saw what happened in the not last couple of races, but he's had a couple of races throughout the season where tires blow up. He gets hit with Hamilton off that battle, and then he goes into the wall, and then his car gets floored. So, as a neutral, I'm hoping Red Bull doesn't have a DNF again, or Verstappen can actually have a fair fight because the Drivers' Championship is extremely close. After looking at these practice sessions, what do you guys expect for quali tomorrow? Who do you think is coming out on top?
Well, this is a Mercedes track. They've won a lot of the races here since the regulations changed in 2014. Really, the only two exceptions were 2018 and 19 when Sebastian Vettel and Charles Leclerc won for Ferrari. So, I mean, and looking at the different timings, the times and the setups that the cars had in the practice sessions, you do tend to favor Mercedes here, especially with Valtteri Bottas topping the first session, and then Mercedes right on the heels of Max Verstappen in FP2 as well. So, the setup is going to be really interesting because the first and third sectors are all about speed, but then the second sector is downforce. So that it does throw a bit of a challenge for teams when they determine what sort of wing setups they want, when it comes to downforce and all that. So it is, I mean, you do tend, I'm still going with Mercedes to do well on Saturday and Sunday.
Yeah, I do think it's going to be down to the wire. And there's one aspect that obviously as F1 fans, we don't fully, wrap our heads around because we never expect it, but that's rain. Rain usually tends to just magically avoid F1 races whenever they go to these weekends, which is kind of wild. But based off of the forecast that there is for Spa, it's raining right now. It's raining tomorrow.
And it's Belgium. Belgium's very frequently, Belgium, the weather, it frequently rains over there. So
exactly. But
you might have
that as well is we've seen it in the past in Formula One, specifically in that crazy battle that we saw between Kimi Räikkönen and Lewis Hamilton back in 2008. It can rain on one part of the track and not rain on the other part of the track very easily on Spa-Francorchamps. It's arguably, I think it is the largest track on the F1 calendar, and it's going to be an absolute crazy Grand Prix in that sense. I do think Mercedes is going to have the upper end, especially in the qualifying. It seemed like that Mercedes is faster over one lap. Obviously, we've seen Max Verstappen do absolute miracles this year. So who knows how it's going to turn out in qualifying. But if I'm going to put my money on anyone, regardless of rain, regardless of anything, you got to put money on either Valtteri Bottas or Sir Lewis Hamilton. They've just been very, very good at this track over the past couple of years.
Yeah, I feel like it is going to be Mercedes that's going to top qualifying, but I also do I can see Max Verstappen splitting the two. To be honest, I can see a 1-2-3 of Hamilton, Verstappen, Bottas.
The Hambot Ver back at it.
Yeah. Verstappen just in FP2, he just seems so quick until obviously he spun and then hit the wall, but it's going to be a battle. And then with the rain, obviously it's talked to be the biggest equalizer in F1 is wet weather. So should be interesting to see how it goes.
I'm kind of going against the grain. I got to respect as a Red Bull fan. I'm going for Max Verstappen as pole position. I like, even though when you look at it, he did top the timing in FP2 and you look at FP1, like practice sessions are really hard to tell by because we see Valtteri Bottas, he gets FP1, first place in FP1 in like 1, 2, and 3. And then Lewis Hamilton goes out and gets pole position. So not saying you can take the practice sessions with a grain of salt, but you kind of have to with Spa as well. But for me, I think Max Verstappen is be pole position, Lewis Hamilton's be up there. But I also think that a surprise Pierre Gasly, so I expect him to be high up in the ranks, at least top 5, because he was running really well in Friday's practice, as well as possibly Fernando Alonso in the Alpine. Like they were both running really well. So depending on weather and stuff, you never know. Just expect them to be up there, I think, for the kind of battling for those top spots.
Well, let's talk about the midfield battle now, because obviously it looks like most of us are favoring Mercedes, at least for the qualifying session. And then we're going to have Red Bull coming right behind them, at least for Verstappen. But as you mentioned, AlphaTauri and Alpine, Alonso, Gasly, they both finished top 5 in, I believe it was FP2. So let's look at this midfield battle. Obviously, we know what Lando Norris has been doing in McLaren. What do you guys expect after the main Mercedes versus Red Bull? Who do you think follows after, looking at the constructors for this specific race? Which team on Spa are you expecting to kind of show out?
I mean, I still think it's going to be Ferrari that's going to come out on top in this battle. They've rebounded so well from last year's horrible season, and now Ferrari has Carlos Sainz, who knows how McLaren operates to a certain degree. Obviously, they must have changed things in regards to his departure last year. So, but he does know how McLaren operates, and he can maybe use that to his advantage, and he has been using that to his advantage. McLaren really don't have two drivers to take the fight to Ferrari right now. Daniel Ricciardo is not doing very well. Second half of the season could change that, but right now it's been all Lando Norris, and Ricciardo is not really backing him up as much as he needs to be. So, I mean, you do feel like this is Ferrari's battle to lose at this point, and they did do very well in the practice sessions today as well, despite Leclerc crashing out in FP2. But I still tend to favor Ferrari, and I'm not saying that just because I am a Ferrari fan. They do genuinely look quite impressive.
If I have to throw my hat into the ring of what team is going to be next, it's not going to be a McLaren. It's not going to be a Ferrari. I'm going to put my money on AlphaTauri this weekend. I really do feel like Pierre Gasly is taking that next step so far this season. He's really demonstrated what he can do at different races, especially during the qualifying sessions. We saw that during practice. He was very, very great. He was up there with the top dogs in this session. And one thing that we know about Yuki Tsunoda is that he's fast. He's very, very reckless from time to time. He still needs to get that experience, that racecraft, so to say, but he's fast. And if there's one thing that we've seen from this AlphaTauri car is that it's an absolute bullet down the straights. If Yuki Tsunoda can maximize it and get out of any really silly mistakes during the weekend, based off of that and based off of how good Gasly's been, I think AlphaTauri is going to be a team that's going to be the third best this weekend and maybe even contend for a podium if it comes to Gasly having another masterclass.
Yeah, I'm going to piggyback off of that. Gasly was actually third in FP1 and fifth in FP2. He's been really fast this Friday. And I mean, through this season, Gasly's just really been improving on all fronts. He's been probably the most consistent driver on the grid when it comes to the midfield, just always up there with points finishes, top 6, top 7 finishes. And when it comes to Yuki Tsunoda, like, yeah, he has had some mishaps, but like you said, it's down the straight. The car is so fast, and through that through Eau Rouge. That's really going to be where a lot of moves are going to be made. I think Pierre Gasly had like a ridiculous move last year through Eau Rouge, and yeah, really excited.
For me, looking at it this weekend specifically, I think AlphaTauri will come out at top. Pierre Gasly is going to really just dominate in terms of the midfield battle. Looking further down into the season, I think Ferrari is going to come out on top because they have been strong kind of all season early on in this 2021 season, taking podiums, taking race wins as well, or not race wins, but yeah, podiums and pole positions as well in different tracks. So in my mind, that's going to just be better than they're going to be better than McLaren based on the fact that McLaren doesn't really have a second driver. McLaren right now is kind of like what Red Bull was kind of like in 2019, where like Max Verstappen was like doing really well at a young age. He was dominating, but they didn't really have a second driver to support him. And that's why they struggled in the Constructors' Championship. And I think that's why McLaren right now, even though, yes, they're still tight with Ferrari, that's only because of Lando Norris's great finishes that he had this season. But overall, I think Ferrari's going to take it in the end.
All right, so we've talked a little bit about teams for Spa. Now, TJ, tell us a little bit about what's happening next season with a couple of not necessarily driver changes, but guys staying at their current teams.
Yeah, so the news came out that Fernando Alonso and Sergio Perez both re-upped with Alpine and Red Bull respectively. And in all honesty, it wasn't really a surprise that either of them would be staying on for next season. I mean, Fernando Alonso, he had a bit of a rough start to the year, but he has generally found form and he is doing very well. And looking at the last race in Hungary, he held off Lewis Hamilton to help Esteban Ocon get his first F1 win. And that really was huge. Had that not happened, Hamilton could have very well won the race. And then looking at Sergio Perez, the reason they brought him in is because he ended up winning a race in Formula One. He won the 2020 Sakir Grand Prix when he basically got punted to the back after a first lap incident, and he came back through the field and won the race. Yes, he had a bit of luck with other drivers getting some misfortune, but I mean, that really said everything everyone needed to know about Sergio Perez. He deserved a win. He got a win, and Red Bull had no choice but to choose him over Alex Albon for this season. And their faith was backed up when he got a win in another chaotic race, which was in Baku earlier this year. So, I mean, it was no surprise that both of them would be staying on. And that does also mean that certain other drivers like Pierre Gasly will also be staying at AlphaTauri because there's nowhere really for him to go for next season as well.
Speaking of rumored driver changes, this quote is on the Outside the Cockpit Instagram. It's Valtteri Bottas in an interview with MTV Sport, and here's what he said. Lewis told me pretty directly that he would like me to remain his teammate. Together we can do very well. It is a fact, though, that we as drivers don't have terribly much influence on it. There's a bigger machine behind it, and that ultimately makes those decisions. So we know, F1 fans know, Mercedes fans know, the whole motorsport industry knows. George Russell is probably next up for Mercedes. But also, Lewis Hamilton is going to be the number one driver, and Valtteri Bottas has done an amazing job at helping him win the last couple championships as that number two, and Bottas has been great as a number two. Lewis clearly likes Bottas as the number two instead of bringing in young fire. So with the whole Rosberg and Hamilton thing, we saw how close that was, where they were going 1-2, 1-2, 1-2 up until the last race of the season. Now, do you think Hamilton wants George Russell, the young up-and-coming Mercedes driver, to come in and challenge him for that number one spot? Probably not. So you would think the internal discussions going on at Mercedes is Hamilton saying, I want Valtteri to stay on. And we talked about this on a couple shows. Mercedes has a very big decision to make. What do you guys think they should do?
Well, if I can just hop in right here in this sense, this honestly really reminds me of what Ferrari was faced with back in the mid-2000s. You know, Michael Schumacher was always the top dog during his whole career. He would say, I want this guy to be my number two. Why? Because he knew that would be his number two. You saw it perfectly with Rubens Barrichello, who, in my opinion, is one of the drivers that could have actually challenged or had the talent to be a championship-winning driver, but he had so much loyalty to Michael Schumacher, to Ferrari, that he was the perfect number two driver. When you think of a number two, you think of him. honestly. And then after that, he brought in Felipe Massa, who even though he ended up challenging for a title once Schumacher left, he was the perfect number 2 to Michael. Whatever Michael did, whatever he said, it stood. And Ferrari faced a very difficult decision going into 2007 because Michael Schumacher still wanted to keep Massa. But there is a certain driver named Kimi Räikkönen who was on the market that Ferrari really wanted. And Ferrari ended up saying, our team isn't Michael Schumacher, our team is our team. We're bringing in Kimi to partner him with Michael, and Michael opted to retire. And we ended up with that Kimi and Massa lineup that actually was quite successful for them in that short 3-year stint. Mercedes is in a very similar situation because right now Hamilton is their team in a sense. Mercedes wouldn't be where they're at if it wasn't for Sir Lewis Hamilton. He runs the shots. He says, I want Bottas because Bottas is my number 2. He's my guy. Bottas has been backing that up. But Mercedes knows that if they go one more year while not calling up George Russell, there is a likelihood that another team on the grid is going to come in and snatch him. McLaren at the moment, they're seeing how Danny Rick isn't performing. You could maybe see McLaren take a swing at the fences and try to go into George Russell if he doesn't get signed.
Can we imagine the two British guys, Lando and George Russell, in McLaren? Oh my.
It would be wild, but the point of it being is that Mercedes faces this decision, and the reason why it's so hard is because Russell's at that point where he doesn't want to be the B driver. He doesn't want to be stuck at Williams waiting for the call-up. He wants to go into a machine that can give him certified points, certified podiums, and maybe even wins. And if Mercedes isn't going to give it to him, I think he might end up looking elsewhere. So Mercedes is facing that decision. Do they risk their future to please Hamilton in the now? Or are they going to tell Hamilton, you're going to have to deal with it. Russell's our guy. You're going to have to deal with it. And then from there, will Hamilton opt to stay or will Hamilton just leave? And then we'll see a pairing similar to what we saw with Massa and Raikkonen, where it ends up being Russell and Bottas. It's going to be a very tough decision, but I really do feel like Mercedes at the moment, I don't think they're going to risk losing Lewis Hamilton, especially with the fact that he's openly said he's down to driving in the new regulations. I think they're going to keep Bottas around.
I have a question for you guys who would know better than me. He just signed that extension, the 2-year extension, I believe, Hamilton. Say they went that route and went Russell, and he's like, well, I'm pissed now. I wanted Valtteri. Would he have to retire, or can he get out of that contract?
I think you'd have to retire, honestly.
And what do you think Hamilton, who can still? All right, actually, Corrado, go ahead.
Yeah, I was gonna say I don't think Lewis is retiring regardless of what they choose. I really think that they've had their eyes set on George Russell since maybe even the start of the season, and it's just been reassured with how well he's performing with Williams. Everyone saw the clip of Russell saying, sacrifice my race for Nicholas if it comes down to that. And I think that's the kind of energy that they want to be with Lewis Hamilton. And if Russell gets the spot with Mercedes, I think he'd be okay with being considered the number 2 driver, at least until, it's proven that Hamilton is, fallen off. But I do think it's going to be a Hamilton-Russell combination in Mercedes next season.
Yeah, I agree with Corrado as well. I think they're planning for the future if they're going to sign George Russell, because in the event that they don't sign Russell and then he gets scooped up by another team and then Hamilton retires, okay, they're left with Bottas, but then who else? You do also have some other up-and-coming talents, but other than their Mercedes driving pool, their academy driving pool, I'm trying to think of maybe Nick DeVries comes in, but that's just a really big stretch there. If he were to come into that Mercedes spot, maybe Esteban Ocon. So there's limited options for Mercedes, and I think if you have George Russell at your wheelhouse who's wanting to come up, you need to just pull the trigger and just be listen, we're pulling him up for next year, and Hamilton's just going to have to deal with it. George Russell, it doesn't seem like he's a big guy for confrontation. Maybe we haven't seen that really side of him, I guess, but it could possibly happen. But I just think that he'll accept the number 2 position, learn from Hamilton, because there's a lot to learn from Hamilton as well. And then from there, he can move on and kind of advance to that number 1 driver for Mercedes.
As we're talking about driver changes and internal discussions, all of our favorite show, Draft to Survive, is getting extended for season 4, coming out in 2022, meaning we're going to see everything that happened this season, once again, all dramatized by Netflix, which means the crash at Silverstone, Pirelli's little explosion of the tires at Bahrain. Oh yeah, Mercedes internal conflicts, Red Bull, Horner versus Toto. Everything is coming back, and I think it's going to be even better than season 3. How excited are you guys to see it return?
Oh, super excited. I mean, this, like you said, this season has been one of the best seasons I can remember watching. I mean, the season really has it all: off-track controversy, on-track controversy, a championship battle that's on a knife's edge. It's got it all. And I mean, yes, Netflix has faced, you know, accusations that they sort of Hollywoodize the series to make it more exciting, but that's what they do. They have to make it exciting because there are certain things about Formula One that aren't that exciting, although, you know, they tend to play it up a little bit, and thankfully they do. I'm actually happy they do that, because the reality is quite the opposite of, you know, what is often seen. Like, if you compare it to football, you know, the European football transfer season that's going on right now, everyone thinks it's, you know, like, there's, oh, deals are being made. Oh, Messi to PSG, Ronaldo's now going to Man U, Varane going to Man U. Everyone's moving. All these big names are moving. But the reality is it can be a lot darker. So I really do like the fact that they've made it exciting in some way.
Yeah, for sure. I'm excited for Drive to Survive for this coming season, mainly because I think it's going to finally demonstrate how good they are at telling a proper story, in a sense. Because they have over dramatized it. Obviously, they have kind of had to do that for some seasons. You know, Hamilton wrapped up the championship last year by Turkey, right? He wrapped up the championship really early. It was like that for past seasons as well. So you can't have that title fight type of energy throughout. There's going to be a season where it seems like they're finally going to have a fight that can last throughout the season, and they won't have to just pick stories and try to make things up towards the end of the season. They can actually have a consistent theme throughout. It's going to be very interesting how they do with storytelling, because as we saw, they do like jumping around to different points of the season from episode 1 all the way to episode 10, and that's definitely going to be one of the key marks to see how they continue with all of that. The episode that I really hope gets made, and if they don't, I'm going to be very frustrated with them, is the win for Esteban Ocon at Hungary. If that's not an episode on its own, I'm going to be very disappointed on them, because even though that doesn't fit the main narrative of Red Bull versus Mercedes, that's a point you need to highlight, because it's very, very big for F1, especially seeing a team like Alpine that has such a rich history finally get back to the top step of the podium.
Yeah, I'm also really excited. I mean, to piggyback on what TJ said with the over dramatizing things from the season that may not have been dramatic as they are, it is what you have to do. Look how many new fans F1 has generated, probably from this show. Like, I have friends who message me like, "Oh, what does this mean? And what does this mean?" And I'm like, "Why are you into F1 now?" And it's all because of this show on Netflix that was recommended to them. It's what it needs to grow the sport, and I think that's a big reason why F1 agreed with doing a docu-series like this, is because they know that with the publicity and everything, it's going to help grow. And yeah, it's really exciting for season 4, and I mean, I hope they keep going. I don't see why there'd be a reason to stop at 4, maybe 5, 6. Who knows?
Yeah, I'm super excited as well. Like, season 4 coming up. The one episode that I do want to see is the interaction between George Russell and Valtteri Bottas at Imola earlier this season, kind of that crash and like the aftermath of that, and how it kind of went between Toto and like George and stuff, and what went down. But I think as well, what's interesting as well, to piggyback what Corrado said with the new fans, is like, I have a buddy of mine whose parents literally just watched the show for like, they binge watch it 2 weeks in a row. They do not watch F1. They just watched the show. They really liked it because it just was drama filled. It was a great produced show, and they have to do that to a certain reason, because it is television. They have to have ratings. They have executives. They have to certain meet levels and stuff. But it's going to be a great season with lots of moment. And I think as well, they're going to have 10 good episodes where they're going to be able to each episode mention a little bit about the title fight. I think that's going to be huge. Just a little bit of the title fight each episode. I definitely think that's going to probably happen.
We talk about dramatizing, over Hollywooding everything, but obviously Drive to Survive is on a very big pedestal because it's one of the best docuseries ever. If you watch All or Nothing, which they do for college football, NFL, Premier League, and now the Toronto Maple Leafs somehow got their own series, they over dramatize everything to make it look a lot more interesting, but it also helps bring fans to the sport. And F1 has done a really good job of kind of letting Netflix in behind the scenes and making it look a lot more interesting than it really should be. Speaking of making things interesting, Michael Schumacher. one of the greatest drivers of all time, 7-time world champion, is getting his own documentary on Netflix, and that is releasing September 15th. So in just a few weeks. Now, obviously, we know the story with Schumi. We know everything that has happened recently. But I think this is going to be a great documentary for people who weren't able to experience the type of driver he was and just how electric he was when he was racing. I'm a little bit too young to have watched his prime, but obviously we still know about him. Kids that are even younger than us, they've heard the name, but they grew up watching Hamilton and Vettel. They didn't grow up watching Schumacher. So I think this should be a really interesting documentary. What do you think the importance of Netflix releasing this specifically right now?
Well, I mean, obviously there was considerable interest because Michael's son Mick is racing in Formula One, so that was really that's what I believe to be the driving force. But I mean, he's just had he has a fantastic story, fantastic career, and I obviously never saw him race. I started watching F1 only 5 years ago, but I mean, it's still a name that I really love, and he's still a drive. See, I've seen some of his drives on YouTube, and some of the stuff he pulled off was absolutely incredible, and I'm so excited. I cannot wait for this.
Yeah, I agree with you. I am a bit too young to remember Michael actually racing like live, but I have been watching F1 since as long as I can remember, and my dad had this thing. He would buy the F1 season review that they used to do, where every season they would just do an overwatch of what happened in each race, and it was in a sense sometimes over dramatized, and you would mistake in certain things here and there, but I remember specifically every season from 2001 all the way to 2007, and the driving force behind all of it was Michael Schumacher. Not only was he an absolute demon behind the wheel, he has amazing charisma to the public. He just knows how to speak to people. He just knows how to get a story out of people. But additionally, the things that a bunch of drivers say, like how hard-headed Michael Schumacher was, especially when it came to winning everything. I think the documentary is perfect because not only does Mick is racing now, but with Lewis Hamilton being as dominant as he is, with a potential 8th title on the cards, making him the GOAT, so to say, on paper in the sport, I feel like Netflix is really just going back like, yeah, but don't forget Michael Schumacher did this. Don't forget how much he inspired people, because you hear from Seb Vettel, who is a 4-time champion. You hear from even Fernando Alonso, my apologies. Like, he said Michael was just an absolute demon. He was just a different guy to inspire. Hamilton said he was inspired by Schumi. Greats inspire greats. And that's just one thing we got to keep in mind for sure. And I think the Schumi documentary is definitely going to show that to a lot of people.
Yeah, I mean, like they said, we're all a little bit too young to have remembered any of Schumacher's races. But when you think F1, you think probably Ferrari, and then when you think of Ferrari, you probably think of Schumacher. And to have that legacy, to have that name besides such a iconic name is that's GOAT status. That's when you've really cemented your legacy. And this documentary is really going to show how impactful he was to the sport.
Yeah, pretty much just to piggyback on what everyone else said. I'm super excited for the documentary, September 15th. It's going to be great. Super excited. It's going to be interesting to see. Obviously, I didn't get to see Schumacher Prime, but I've definitely been watching a lot of YouTube videos on him and stuff, and it's just some of the moves he's made is absolutely insane. So, yeah.
And I think this is the perfect time to wrap up this episode of the Outside the Cockpit pre-race show. We are pre-qualifying show as well, so give you a little bit of our insight before quali actually starts. But as always, it's been a pleasure to be joined by you guys. We have Spa on Sunday, August 29th, 9 a.m. Eastern time, and then we have Zandorf, and then we have Monza. So after the little break, F1 is back. Drive to Survive is confirmed for a 4th season. The Schumacher documentary is coming out, and we are coming down the stretch of the second half of the F1 season. Thank you so much for watching, and make sure you go and follow everyone who is on this panel today, and we'll see you guys next week. Outside the Cockpit, presented by the Intermission Sports.